Moving on, they continued to patrol. There was another smaller ville, a half a dozen thatched huts several hundred meters north of us, and Leslie and I thought it would be best to strike out in its direction since we had a pretty well worn out our welcome in our present location. Heading north, we were fired on by snipers before we even cleared the ville, and although no one was hit, it was an unmistakable sign of worse to come. Turner was so angry that he grabbed an old man and his young granddaughter and placed them in the column on the theory that the enemy would not risk firing at us with civilians in our midst. I made no move not to stop him. And since the snipers stopped firing, I decided to keep our unwilling additions until we reached the next ville. The old man had lost an arm years before and waved his stump furiously at me, as if he thought that the missing limb would give me a change of heart. But the little girl seemed to realize that we were resolute, taking her grandfather by his remaining hand, led us at double time into the smaller village. When we reached the outskirts, Corporal Turner removed his gold earring and gave it to the little girl, who pocketed it without a noticeable change of expression, turned abruptly on her heels, and headed back in the opposite direction. The thought crossed my mind that I was losing whatever decency I had brought with me to Vietnam, but I was too tired and frustrated to entertain it for long. Besides, just ahead of us, there was another village that had to be disrupted and bent to my will if we were going to survive another day. Continuing. We moved directly into the high ground and set up in a rough perimeter around the crest of a hill. As we had anticipated, the view was unobstructed in all directions, and I was pleased with my selection as our command group set in on the summit. Turning towards Sergeant Leslie to comment on our choice, I could see the Marine nearest to me on the periphery slipping off his pack. Just then an explosion broke the silence and a red flash filled the darkness in front of me. The force of the explosion spun me around to the ground and I scrambled back to my knees. I could smell the smoke and hear the young man moaning. When I attempted to refocus my vision on the wounded Marine, my eyes were blurry and I touched my hand to my face. I realized that my glasses had been blown off by the blast. My face was also wet where I had placed my hand, and I again brought my hand back toward my face. Blood trickled between my fingers. At first I thought I'd been hit in the head, but when my hand began to throb, I realized that my luck had been much better and I'd only taken a piece of shrapnel in the hand. The Marine who had set off the booby trap had been much less fortunate, and his body absorbed most of the impact. One of his legs had been broken by the blast, and a piece of bone protruded obscenely from his pants at mid-thigh. His arm on the opposite side was riddled with shrapnel, as was much of his side, and by the time I had recovered enough to work my way over to his position, Ellis already was working frantically on him. Within minutes, he had applied battle dressings to stem the bleeding, immobilized the broken leg, and injected the man with a dose of morphine. I ignored his offer to bind my hand, which by comparison looked like a razor neck, and turned toward Watson, my radio operator, who was already on the medevac net. When Ellis got our casualty stabilized, he informed me that there was a real danger of losing him if we did not get a prompt medevac, and I summoned the chopper as forcefully as I could. It seemed fitting that I had lost my glasses and was losing my perspective on the war at about the same time, and although several men congratulated me on having earned my first Purple Heart, I was in no mood to respond to their remarks. So they get him medevaced, and they patrol back to camp. As we entered the camp and headed to our company area, we passed a group of rear echelon cooks and bakers who had just finished watching a movie on the outdoor screen they had rigged to help them with their boredom. The movie screen had been a sore subject with my men since it had first been erected, because we had to troop directly by it on our way out to and from the bush. On this occasion, one of the hapless cooks started to make a comment about grunts returning from war games, and several of my men pummeled him to the ground before he had finished his sentence. Leslie and Turner quickly ended the fracas, but Even the most dim-witted among us shared the frustration that had triggered the outburst. We had just lost another casualty in defense of the domino theory, and there was nobody among us who was going to let a slight by a rear echelon motherfucker go unanswered. Woods gave us news that our casualty was going to live, but his time in the bush and the Marine Corps was probably over. I felt like crying and wondered how my father had handled these kinds of situations. I sensed that I was going to have to get over feeling personally responsible every time one of my Marines was wounded, or I would go mad. But for now, all I wanted was the oblivion that another gallon of beer would bring. Leslie proposed a toast to the Green Machine and its proud traditions, and after several more beers, I understood with remarkable clarity the meaning of the expression, eat the apple and fuck the Corps.